Let's act like we were like having all fun. Let everyone laugh. Ha 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 ha
Ah.
Haha.
And then what did I
Welcome,
see but a
everyone.
penguin?
Well, yeah, what a funny joke you made. Hello, everyone, to the horror panel. I am here with many people. Who am I? I'm Jem. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm a big horror enthusiast. And I cannot believe I am doing this with these people. What a cool thing. Let's introduce ourselves, I think. I'm going to go with my screen. Anna, you're the first. Introduce yourself, please.
Oh my, oh my. Hello, I am Anna Stein. My pronouns are she, her, and he, him. I am a big fan of listening to horror audio dramas. I also have a horror podcast called Before the Tone and a more lighthearted sci-fi podcast called A Somewhat Peculiar Frog.
All right, David.
Good morning, because it is 4 o'clock in the morning for me. I'm David Alt, he, him. You may know me from such podcasts as the No Sleep Podcast, Woe Begone, and Shadows at the Door, which is our queer British northern horror in the style of M.R. James and such things. I think that was it. I'm very tired.
It's okay. Hannah?
Hi, I'm Hannah, she, her. I am the producer and writer for the mystery horror podcast Anchorwood After Dark, and I also write horror on the side for various journals and magazines and stuff. So I love horror. It's my thing.
Marisa?
Yeah, my name is Marisa Ewing, she, they pronouns. I'm the creator, director, audio editor for Liars and Leeches, which is a supernatural horror podcast. You might have also heard me around doing work on some other shows like Dark Dice, a little bit of White Vault. What else? Maxine Miles, and
Everything, ever.
a few things. And Dark Sanctum. I also work on horror for games. Last published games were Last of Us Part 1 and Part 2. I think that's it.
That's so cool. Ollie?
Hi, I'm Ollie, Oliver Zabo. I go by he, him, or they, them pronouns. I'm an amateur filmmaker, sound designer, writer, and I'm the creator and director and editor of my audio drama Graven.
That's amazing. Someone in the chat said, I think it's Adorable Door. I wish David had listed all the credentials. That would be another panel. If they can do it, they can. I don't think we have time for that.
Yeah, I might leave it. Yes, I've been doing this almost 20 years now. This December, I'll have been doing voice acting for 20 years since I left university. So I'm feeling
That's
very old amongst all the Gen Zs.
It's okay. We love you anyways.
Thank you.
I think firstly I want to mention there's a giveaway for microphones and stuff. I'm pretty sure Moth will send a link in the chat soon when they're able to. Join that because you're already here, so you're already participating in the event. So why not? You know. I wanna say this is so cool. I wanna thank PBC for this because what a cool idea, and we're all here together. One of the things that was like my thing is that I love horror so much. I have been a horror enthusiast since birth. My mother, I got it from my mother. It's in my genes. Um, I want to ask, what is the reason behind your fear? Meaning, what draw you into horror? And I want to start with, and again, I'm going to go alphabetically. I'm sorry.
Well, for me, I actually, for most of my life, really didn't like horror. I get very easily paranoid, and so uh, consuming horror would throw me off a lot. And it was actually discovering audio drama horror that made me realize, oh, this medium, sure, it sometimes makes me a little bit paranoid, but for whatever reason, I can listen to it and get into it and all of that without it affecting me too much. And that was a wonderful discovery to find this whole genre that's so interesting. And I guess I'll get into this probably later, but horror is an example of a genre where you can get a lot of speculative elements without really needing to leave the real world, which is really fun. You can have a monster or something in a horror story and not have it be like a crazy different reality, or you can. And I think that's really fun and interesting. But yeah, so audio drama, which I got into listening to audio drama in the pandemic in 2020. And that's kind of what let me get into horror as a genre.
That's interesting because when I was listening to Before the Tone, I was like, this at first, at least the first episodes, I was like, this is a real life horror, right? Like, would it be fun if we learned that there's nothing supernatural going on? It's just like, this is the horror because stalkers. So it's interesting to hear that actually for me. Now let's go to David.
Right.
Why are you here?
Why am I here? Well, yeah, I've been doing horror for quite a long time. I think I think last year was my 10th anniversary on No Sleep. And I got into audio drama when I was listening to cassettes of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy back in the early 90s, which is before some of you were born, which is terrifying. Yeah, I always loved ghost stories. That was one thing that I loved as a child, and so I think that was my gateway drug into horror. And so combining the two, combining the horror and audio drama, just led naturally into exploring that. I suppose one of the first things that I listened to was Darker Project's Night Terrors, which was a short anthology series with ghost stories, and then that sort of led on. And yeah, the wonderful thing about the audio drama space is that all of the pictures are in your mind, and that's what sets it apart from film and video, because you create the characters and you create the horror as much as you want to, and you can then switch it off at the end, which I think is also quite an important part of horror fiction, rather than horror reality, which quite a lot of people, or yeah, there's plenty of that in the world. I think there's more than enough of that in the
Yeah,
world, really. So that's what I
unfortunately.
like about horror fiction.
Yeah. Do you sometimes do write also? I think people don't know that, but you also write horror. And I'm
I
gonna say
do.
that to people. If you don't know, David does write horror too.
Yeah, I one of the first things that I wrote for No Sleep was based on um, being a Santa at the local Christmas
Hmm.
thing,
That was a
and
great story.
thank you. It was based in reality, not
That is
totally, but
horrifying to hear.
tell me about it. It was not a fun job. But yeah, I do write horror as well, and just because it's nice, I like to explore, and horror allows you to push the boundaries in so many ways. The Another one that I enjoyed was the one where the guy keeps on being born over and over again, and I love that exploration of how someone
Hmm.
goes back over the same thing, but with knowledge that he's doing it. So yeah, I do write horror. It's a lot of fun, but I only do it when I'm what's the word? Uh,
It's okay. It's 4 a.m.
yeah,
for you. You can
it
just
is.
skip
Yes.
and we will be okay
Uh,
with that.
well, yeah. When I have the impulse to write, so it
Yeah.
doesn't happen very
People
often.
actually do remember when the story came out, the mole Santa story. We have Miles Skull. Is that how I'm supposed to read, or it's like Michael? I have no idea. Um, who does remember? So like we have old people here too, right? Just know that.
Thank you.
Hannah, what about you?
Hi. Uh, horror was like a thing that I did with my mum as a kid because nobody else in the house could stand to watch horror movies. So she drafted
Twinsies.
me in at like the very young age of like 9 or 10. I was like, "You'll be good with this, right?" And I was like, "Huh?" I wasn't good with it, but I kept it a secret, like all kids do when it's that sort of thing. It's like, "Oh, I get to watch adult things. That's cool. I'm gonna pretend that this doesn't bother me." But as I got older, I got more and more sort of into the space and just sort of started to get too genre savvy, I'd say, at some points, and too annoyed at like the visuals behind the horror being a letdown, which is why I love horror in audio fiction so much because the like David said, the visuals are you get to apply them in your own brain via listening, and I'm sure we'll get into this later. Like it's one of the things, but like that ability to never be disappointed because what could be disappointing about something that is just suggested enough to freak you out?
Yeah. So I'm seeing like most of us started watching horror with our moms. Me too. It was not even
I
horror. I think it was Doctor Who at late night, and my mom was watching it, and I was waking up, and she would say like, "Go back to sleep," and I would not, of course. Um, so yeah,
Doctor Who was
that's
the
nice
gateway
to
drug
hear.
into audio drama for me as well. That's what I usually say is that was it. It was my love of Doctor Who.
Yeah, same
Yeah,
here.
but I didn't watch
Um,
any horror with my mother.
Now you can now. That's what matters.
She wouldn't watch it. I can tell you that much.
So turns out we don't have old people. I am sorry. Turns out my school is not old, but that's okay. They are old in soul, not in that way. Um, let's move on to Marissa. How about you?
Yeah, so I think for me, I was kind of similar to Anna, where when I was younger, I really didn't like horror. I remember even like, like crying watching movies that weren't that scary, like The
Oh.
Incredibles and things like that. So I remember my mom kind of, some of y'all started watching horror with her. I started with like very old horror where you could like, kind of see some of the effects and, the skeleton floating at you. You can see the string, it's not that scary. And kind of got into it that way. So like the original House on Haunted Hill, like old Frankenstein, black and white stuff. Um, I think my next step into horror though was definitely graphic novels. I feel like that, like especially like Junji Ito, like Deserted
Mm.
Classroom, stuff like that as well, is what really got me more into horror. So I think now what got me into audio drama was probably getting hired to work on Dark Dice. I didn't realize that there were horror audio dramas. Then they were like, "Hey, we need, an audio engineer." So I got into it, I guess, like client side first, and then became a fan. And now I'm just kind of like a horror junkie, always trying to like find the newest thing. So my big things right now are like indie horror games, haunted houses, and audio dramas.
That's so cool. And I think there's I can now that I know this, can hear in Liars and Leeches that a vibe of old horror.
Yeah,
Um, and that's so interesting to hear because like I was like, this is very different to me. And now I can see why. I don't think many shows do that anymore. Or like they're not trying yet, let's say that.
yeah.
Um, so that's
We
so
were,
cool.
if you were to look at our like I guess mood board of films that we were drawing from. One of the big inspirations was the OG Candyman, so that's why it's kind of like
Mm,
a 70s ish kind of sounds similar
yeah,
to that. We use that as
It's a
inspiration.
good one.
yeah. Well, good one. Let's move on to Ollie too.
Yeah, well, so I'm on David's side of things. My parents absolutely despise anything horror related, which is funny because my grandma loves horror so much, and she's been one of my biggest supporters with this audio drama. But at some point in high school, my friends showed me The Shining, and I loved it, and I went on a kick after that. Got super into Mike Flanagan and discovered that religious horror is a lot of fun to write and both to watch. So I got into writing a lot of that, and that's how I got here. But horror is I mean, there's a lot of things that you could be afraid of, and tapping into that is so much fun as a writer. There's infinite possibilities. Anything can be scary. I've learned that from watching so many movies and listening to so many podcasts.
To be honest, it is very nice to hear that you did get into it, but religious horror kind of a thing, because I am going to mention it in the panel, because Graven Pod, I did not realize it was a religious thing because I'm not Christian or like grow up with Christianity, so I had no idea until you said angels. So like that's a very interesting thing to hear. And I think what I'm understanding is like everyone got into horror outside of audio drama, but like was drawn into audio drama. And that makes us aware of the patterns. And I want to ask, what is the actual difference for you, or like why audio dramas and not other media? I know some of you do other media too, but like what is the difference between horror and audio dramas and other medias, other mediums to show your art? This time I'm going to go reversed alphabet, and I'm going to start with Ollie.
Yeah. I mean, I'm drawn to it because just as an art form, audio is both at the same time both extremely diverse way to tell a story, and also like the cheapest way in some ways. So I had this story I wanted to tell, and I love sound design, and I thought, why would I write a novel? Why would I save up to produce this as a TV show if I have this format here, which is perfect for the story I want to tell? And I'm sure we'll talk more about it later, but audio as a medium for storytelling, it really puts the audience as the artist. Like you give them hints as to what, visually they're seeing, but it's all their brains doing all the work, and I think that is super super fun.
That's very. I don't think I have taught it like that. So it was very nice to hear like you are the artist. The audience is the artist who's doing the actual work. Um,
We're
that
laying
is
the
actually,
groundwork.
yeah, that is
They're
actually a very
picturing
cool
what the
way to
characters
see
look
that.
like. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. They're picturing the monster.
Marissa, I know you do movie sound designs and such too, and like games too. How about you? Like, what was the thing that drew you into audio drama, except the fact that you were hired?
Yeah, honestly, I think stumbling into it was honestly how I got into it, but I think that what kept me around, at least, um, especially on the creative side, I like the creative challenge of making horror in audio, because at least a lot of the horror films that I watch, there's not a whole lot of talking. It's very heavily visuals based. Like if you think of like Nosferatu as a recent example, there are long chunks of that movie where people aren't saying anything. So I like the challenge of having to convey a story with only one sense, I guess, just what people can listen to. So I love the creative challenge, and then I think um similar to what Ollie just said, as a listener, I really like the low barrier to entry. I think what keeps me in audio too is I love the creativity that's here, and that, you know, if you have an idea for a story, it's so much easier to make it than doing films or games. So I feel like there's such a uniqueness to the stories that you hear in audio, because, if a studio wouldn't make it into a film, you can take it and make it yourself. So I like the variety of the stories that I listen to here. Like if you think about like Welcome to Night Vale having like, an openly queer character from the jump in a horror story, like in that time period when Night
Yeah.
Vale came out, there's no way that, a studio would have grabbed it then. So
It's
that's
like,
why.
damn you, I'm taking my power back, and that's so cool, actually.
Yeah, exactly, 100%.
Yeah. Hannah?
Hi.
Hi.
You said my name very like, Hannah, your turn. Step up. I was like, oh, okay.
It's your
To second
turn.
a couple of things, like, I think like we're all gonna sort of layer over each other with our answers here in a way because we've all been drawn for very similar reasons to audio drama as a vehicle for horror. But I find, just to sort of say this same thing as Marissa, but slightly different, providing rules to a space like, oh, this is only audio, that limitation can bring out such creativity in the way that you play with something because you are limited. So you have to think like outside of the box in order to achieve the same things that you would be able to achieve if there was a visual component, right? You have to be like thinking more out of your comfort zone in order to achieve what you get. And so you get some really cool things with audio and horror as they shake hands. It's that and the combination of like audio is, if you ever watched a horror movie without the sound on, a friend of mine who really struggles with horror used to do that. She used to just watch it without the sound on.
That's
and
interesting.
takes away most of the power from the thing to remove the sound. Like, lots of the horror is the sound design, even in a visual medium like film. So I feel like audio is like the perfect synthesis of exactly how horror can be presented in a way that is deeply impactful for me.
That is actually very interesting because I've never done that. The only time that I'm like no sound, only watch is like when I'm going to apps to see if they're accessible. I never actually thought about that. So that's an interesting thing to think about, that like horror is mostly ears in a way. If you don't hear it, you cannot be afraid of it. Um, which I think is why storytelling is very strong in horror. So it's interesting. David?
Sometimes when I'm playing horror games, which I don't do often because I don't actually like horror games. I think it's a little bit too real in a way for me.
You are
But
the one who's controlling it.
yes, but I sometimes do take the headphones off, and I will listen or not listen, and yeah, it takes all the sting out of it, which is
Yeah.
it is very interesting for that.
Yeah.
Um,
Segue into the differences between for you.
Yeah, the differences. Well, I think as everyone has said, over the over the last 20 years or so, the barriers have come down because it used to be that if you wanted to produce an audio drama, you'd have to go to a studio and you'd have to hire out the studio and then and have it all professionally put together. But now with the way that broadband and the file limits have come down and down and down. It's much easier to send a high quality WAV file to someone that's 200 meg, and you can just upload it straight away. In a way that back in the old days of dial up, to download 5 megs was a lot, and that you'd have to stay on the phone for 40 minutes for that. So that that barrier has come down. The level of technology has increased and become a lot cheaper. So anyone can make a high quality audio drama at home. And that
Yeah.
being putting that much power into the hands of creatives has just led to this explosion of amazing audio drama and amazing writing, amazing creativity. But for me, audio drama, because audio drama is something that you can consume in the car. You can listen to it while you're doing other things, whereas a film you have to sit and watch, a book you have to sit and read. But audio drama has a lot more availability for people to be able to consume it wherever and whenever they want.
Yeah. And that's actually one of the things that draw me into it because I cannot watch things that long. I know it's a very funny statement as a Hawaiian, but like that's the fact. Anna?
For getting into making audio drama in general, it really was that low barrier of entry. And also something Hannah touched on, I believe, which is this limit in the format that can drive the story for me. The driving point for Before the Tone was I want to tell a story in voicemails. And that was the starting point before I had anything else. And then I had like this final scene in my head, which is changed a little bit from what actually happened. I'm debating if I should say it for spoiler reasons. But my
That's okay.
original
I
concept.
understand you, and people in the chat, you have to go and listen to it so you can come back here and understand it. This is now a mandatory thing.
Yes,
Yeah.
listen to it.
Heck. Yeah, but I originally had that very basic concept where it's like, okay, if it's voicemails, that's going to limit when you're telling the story. It's going to limit the type of person who's telling the story. At I think the time when I came up with the concept, my sibling was traveling and I would leave them these long voicemails. And that can really drive a story. There's a fantastic example of using format as like this driving, really unnerving force in a horror story, and it's one of the Hubris episodes in season 2, Spring Will Bloom, which is written by David Orion Pena, and it's a horror story told through a meditation tape, and it's just absolutely excellent.
What? I gotta listen to that now.
Highly recommend. But because the prompt was spring, so naturally all of us had to go into horror and murder and thrillers. I wrote murder. But anyway, but in terms of audio drama as being a great medium for horror specifically, there are a few things, and some of it's stuff people have already touched on, like, nothing that you show that you can physically create will be as scary or as detailed or as interesting as what someone will picture given like these vague strokes. Also, just a kind of basic thing is audio drama can't do jump scares. And jump scares really bother me in visual media. And so to come into audio drama and be able to just listen, and that element is not going to be present. In serialized audio drama, you also get to become more immersed in the world and kind of engage with horror in a way that's very much tied to the specific canon, which for me at least helps me not be paranoid. Like for Magnus season 1, for example, where it was all individual statements that were disconnected and could be happening in the real world, like that made me a little paranoid, and I was like, I know I just need to push through this first season and binge it in like a week, and then after that I'm gonna be immersed enough in the world that it won't affect me, and that was the case. But yeah, so there are a few different sides of it.
Yeah, I have to disagree with you on the jump scare part, because I think people in the chat are also agreeing with me. The way of jump scare changes, but there are so many jump scares still in the audio drama, I think. And I think the reason why it doesn't feel like jump scare is the style and narrative and how it is portrayed. And that's why I don't think there is jump scare in audio fictions too, but like I also want to like jump back to you and hear your opinions again.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That there are jump scares in terms of like occasionally you'll get like a sudden loud sound or something like that. But I have found that style of jump scare to be less common, at the very least in audio, because, for example, the sudden loud sound, people want to keep more level audio for people using headphones. So, like, if there's gonna be a sudden loud sound, usually they'll say at the beginning, they're like, please, be careful with your headphones.
Okay. and now I understand better. I think it is that jump scare is not the narration. It's not the horror element of it. It's just a thing that happens because jump scare is a cliche, maybe niche, maybe like a thing in horror that happens. So, but it's not the narrative, if I'm understanding that right.
Yeah, I
So
think
that
it's
is the difference.
in horror films, the jump scare can be used very lazily as a
Mhm.
way of giving a sudden audio and visual shock, just to get the viewers' heart rate
Startled.
back up. And so I think the jump scare can be very lazy to give a shock. But if you have an audio drama that does have that sudden twist, that can it can be quite jump scary from that point of view. One of the things that No Sleep does is the suddenly shocking anthologies,
Mhm.
and those are the very very short 3 minute max stories, and those are some of my favorites because it's a very disposable world. Yeah, there's a lot to be said for having that immersion in a series. But there's also something to be said for we're suddenly dropped into a world, something happens, and you think, oh, thank goodness I'm not in there. And then you move on to the next one. And so, yeah, there's lots of different styles of scares, whether it's
Yeah.
the creeping horror of the White Vault or Shadows at the Door, or it's the sort of immediate, quick barrage of horror, like suddenly shocking.
Yeah. That is what I also feel like. Maybe one of the parts why we don't feel like audio dramas have jump scares is because it is well built in, and it is not like boo, it is more into it, and it doesn't like startle you in a way that like it jumps on you. So
And I
maybe,
think
yeah,
there's
maybe technically jump scare is not happening, but a scare that is like sudden does happen.
yeah, I think as Anna said, there's a lot of people who do listen in the car or at work, and to have a sudden loud
Mhm.
sound would be too startling and might even lead to accidents and real horror, which is what we don't want. We want to be creative and spread the joy and spread the love. So I think scares in audio form have to be more existential rather than cheap um, cheap jumps like that.
Yeah. Do any of you also want to add to the jump scare and also the horror and I guess creeping feeling in horror?
Um, yeah, I was just gonna say, the jump scares, the reason that they work so well in the movies, this is another thing that I learned purely because my friend cannot watch horror movies without turning the sound off. They don't happen in movies if you turn the sound down. The rising tension is carried a lot by the sound that the orchestra and the sound design is making as you're creeping down that corridor. So having just audio drama doesn't deliver in the same way, but it is like one of the most important parts of sound design for a jump scare. One of the most important parts of jump scares is sound design, which is really a fun little 1-2 punch.
Mhm.
And yeah, um, I don't I don't know why, but I feel like I want to ask Anna again, not to like now explain yourself. We said otherwise, but like I want to also like hear your thoughts and opinions about what we said. I don't want you to feel like we said no and then talked about that.
I don't uh what was I gonna say? Like audio drama definitely can be very scary and have sudden like changes. I guess like what I had been referring to with the jump scares, like David
Mhm.
was saying, was like this specific type of sudden shift that's
Yeah,
generally
cheap
very
shot.
visual.
Yeah.
Yeah, the cheap shock. That's meant to
Yeah.
make you like jump out of your skin for a second. And I like that
Mhm.
that tends not to be present in audio drama. but you can
Yeah.
get really
Sorry.
intense and you can get really scary. And sometimes you'll have something like the audio suddenly getting cut off or suddenly getting dropped out that will make your stomach drop. And that I think can
Mhm.
be really, really well sound designed
Hmm.
and works so well
Mhm.
for the medium where you can show a lot, but you're not showing everything, which in certain ways is less scary because you're able to be a bit more grounded in your actual environment, and in some ways can be even more scary because whatever they aren't showing you, you can picture something much, much worse.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I do believe with what Hannah said, like cheap shot, and like David and you also said it, like audio drama doesn't let you do cheap shots. I think that is one of the things that I'm noticing. So like it requires you to be very talented or like develop those skills to actually be able to do that. And also you guys can react to each other. I did hear Hannah saying sorry while doing that. Don't be sorry. This is a panel. We're talking here.
It was one of those things
Um,
where I thought Anna was like finished with the sentence and I was about to be like, yeah, because, and then Anna continued. I was like, no, I take it back. But I just saw someone in the chat. I think that's MJ actually. My, I don't know, but maybe not. Say that audio horror has a lot of gothic elements, lessens the big surprise moments where it tends to be atmospheric. It
yes,
has reminded me
I was
of
going to
that
add that too.
really old. Yes, it is MJ. There you go. Hi, MJ. It's reminded me of the quote from the Gothic horror writer Anne Radcliffe, who's back in the day, but this is my niche interest. She sort of said that the difference for her was horror is the act of being shocked and scared, whereas terror was the building, creeping fear. And I feel like audio drama horror tends to want to be the horrible creeping dread and fear, the atmospheric build and tension, as opposed to the sudden shock and horror.
Mhm.
It tends to lean more on terror than it does horror.
Yeah.
For sure.
Um,
Yeah,
for
they're
sure. I
almost two
have
different
nothing
genres at
to
this
add.
point.
Yeah. 10 out of 10, I have nothing to add. That is how I feel right now. I also want to like talk about the narrative styles because you all have very different narrative styles. Some of you are doing what's, narrative only, like one person is telling the story. One of you have both the story going on as a scene and a narrative, and others are like found footage, while some of them are recordings. And I think one of the most interesting ones, I'm not saying that the others weren't, I think it was just because like I experienced it for the first time, is like true crimification of narration, um, which is Englewood After Dark. I just want to like ask you guys, and you guys can hop in. You don't have to like wait or like be, not answer. I want to start with Marissa too, but like, what does make you choose the narration style in horror, and what drove you into that? Because I think Liars and Leeches has that vibe of movie, but it's not, and that was interesting for me.
Yeah, so I think, and this was kind of a point of discussion between me and the sound
Mhm.
designer of the show, on whether or not we were going to have a narrator or not. But I felt like, I guess for people who haven't listened, Liars and Leeches is very like emotions focused and focuses
Mhm.
on sort of the aftermath of trauma and the anxiety and grief that you fear and how it can kind of sneak up on you in unexpected ways. I felt like specifically for this show that there's so much going on in a character's head that when you're watching a movie, you can kind of see it on their face. You can see the ways their eyes shift, or if they start crying, or looking down. There's just like so many facial expressions that convey meaning and emotions in visuals that you don't get in audio drama. And initially, I tried to float the idea of no narrator, but I felt like having a narrator conveying characters' inner thoughts was one of the best ways to tell this type of story. I know that having a narrator for audio drama is not super common if you're doing a full cast, but I felt like it really struck that balance of like filling in the narrative gaps that
Yeah,
would be
it
filled with
does. I
visuals.
can tell you, it works so well with Liars and Leeches
Thank you.
because of the music and the sound design and how it makes the story told without being like held hands and like dragging me into the field, but at the same time it like helps me understand what's going on. And I think the narrator is also like well chosen. So like kudos on that too. So yeah, I think the on the other side, I'm not going to say like you don't have it, but like Ollie Gravenpot has less narration and we get into it as, oh, we're in the middle of this apocalypse. I'm not going to
Mhm.
say a lot, but like, how did that style, or how do you think that style differs from narration style? Because I am not, again, I didn't grow up in a Christian country. I'm not a Christian. So, like, for me to understand some of the things, it took time. And so, like, I'm curious about
Right.
how that style happened for you.
Yeah, well, I'd listened to a few audio dramas before starting making this, and
Mhm.
I liked the idea of having like a single narrator type little story, but I also liked the idea of doing found footage, so I kind of combined both, where the found footage aspect of it is sometimes like a journal for the characters, and then sometimes it's they're in the middle of journaling and then something happens to them, and then it shifts to this is now going to be a live found footage scene. And I liked that part of the Magnus Archives, for example, because he like Jonathan would be uh, he'd be giving his archival log of something that happened, and then someone would burst in the door, and then it would become less of a narrated story. But for Graven, um, it's for at least for religious horror, it lets me use kind of this it's like for found footage, the audience is wondering like why am I listening to this? Like why has this been recorded and what's the framing of
What am I
like
doing
did I
here?
find these logs myself? Like why is this all collected here for me?
Mhm.
And with the kind of the overarching narrative of this cult that the characters are kind of falling deeper and deeper into the story of that's eventually at the end going to become a major part of the story without spoiling too much. But
Mhm,
yeah, the
mhm.
found footage format of it is going to be kind of a in-universe tool, which I think is a super fun thing to do because you can build it really early on by setting the framing device as found footage and then not really explaining, why until later, or you might not ever explain it at all. But I like kind of getting meta with it, so yeah, that's my plan for that. But yeah, it's been a wonderful, wonderful journey to write that way.
Yeah, and actually, you both Marissa and Ollie have narration and the scenes, but the difference of it, I think, makes both of the podcasts sound unique, and I love that so much about it. And Miles Cole actually said, I think it was MJ. MJ said, and I think I agree with that. Like, overhearing what other people are doing in found footage does feel like I'm intruding. Like I'm not supposed to listen, but I'm
Absolutely.
here listening.
Yeah, it's almost like a
With,
voyeurism thing,
Hmm.
which
yeah,
in horror is huge.
yeah, it is.
Yeah, it definitely takes away the innocence in a certain way of the audience because whatever horror the characters are experiencing in a found footage
Hmm.
story, the audience isn't totally innocent. For example, in
Ooh, I like that.
my show, there's
Yeah.
an episode where the voicemail actually gets deleted. but we hear it. Like, and
Yes,
what's wrong with
yes,
you?
that
You
was so
listen to
Oh, I
that?
interesting
remember
She
for
didn't
that.
want
me.
anyone to hear that.
That shook
Yes.
me when I heard that.
Yeah. At the end, when the main character is like deciding and then like saying no, no need, I was like, wait, I thought I was into this. Like I was in with you. You wanted me to hear this. But then that happened and like it shifted. And actually I did want to like ask you after Ollie about it too, like the narration style of that. I am letting you in to yeah, actually you're not in. I'm not letting you in was
Mhm.
one of the most interesting narratives that I've seen in my life. And I want to like ask, how did that happen? And like what drove you into it? It was so interesting. I'm fangirling right now. I'm sorry.
I'm so honored. People listen to my podcast. What?
Yes.
That's crazy. Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, the inspiration for the format was just based on the fact that I leave long voice messages for my sibling and for my friends. And so I wanted that format. And I really do like thinking about these characters and what they would have wanted someone to hear and what we're hearing and what does it mean that you're hearing it in a one-off episode I wrote for the 11th hour horror audio challenge, um, which has the stupidly long title The Mystery and Tragedy of the Renfield Four. I formatted it so that it was someone assembling this found footage and sort of saying like, oh well, this is such an interesting thing, like these four people who like died or went missing, um and we can hear stuff about their last moments, and isn't it interesting, isn't it creepy? And then it comes for them, the person who has assembled it, because they're not as immune from it. And I think that's really fun to think about those consequences in world and then out of world with the fourth wall. I
Mhm.
find that very compelling. The fourth wall in audio drama is fascinating, very transparent.
Yeah. And in that sense of like you being telling the story of something else, that remind me of true crime. Because like I gotta be honest, I don't like true crime at all, due to the fact that I am maybe I'm a lawyer and I'm also a human rights activist, and it feels like invasive to me. And I've never listened to any of them, which is why I was so fascinated with Englewood After Dark, because it is written as if it's starting as a true crime show. And for me, at first, I was like, "Ugh, I feel like I should like not, but at the same time, I knew it was narrative and it was a story instead of a true crime thing. And I think, Hannah, you captured exactly why I have problems with true crime so well, with the tarot cards and speculations about real people's lives and how it affects them. And how I want to just ask, how did you manage to do that? That is like one of the most interesting ideas I think I have ever seen. And yeah, how? Explain to me.
So we talked about this for a while for in the panel I was in yesterday. My brain is broken, but
Yeah, yeah.
we love a good framing device in the audio drama
Mhm.
community. We have narrators, we have found footage, we have voicemails with Anna stuff. We love a good sort of way to package what we're listening to, and doing not found footage. Sorry, doing
True
the
crime.
idea of a true crime podcast as sort of the thing you're listening to sort of involves the listener once again in the act of transgressing against these people via finding pleasure out of listening to these people talk about it. And it also reveals a lot about, hopefully, about the characters and who they are when they're going through it,
Mhm.
because we have Eve, who's our resident skeptic, and then versus Finn, who is our resident but there's ghosts, right? tell me there's ghosts at the bottom of this. But both of them are doing this for purely, like, at the beginning, purely selfish reasons of like, well, this is a fun thing that we want to do, and we want to poke at the urban legends and figure out if we can figure out what's going on. And sort of I don't want to spoil too much, but like their initial success is kind of lampshaded by a twist that is coming in like the next episode. So hey, if you're not caught up in Englewood After Dark, you should.
I am
anyway,
not, but I'm excited.
But even in the first episode, we lampshade it via the ending of episode 1, where it's revealed that yes, you're listening to a true crime podcast that they have put out, but somebody's re-uploading the episodes for you to listen to, and something is wrong here. We love a good fourth wall break of like, something is wrong, I'm re-uploading these for you, maybe you can find something. And then the final call to action for the audience is just help me, I need you to help me. And that's so fun to play with when you have something that happened in universe and then it's being redone in universe, like the deleted voicemail. You get to play with the, wait, so why do we get to listen to these? And also what happened to the point where we couldn't have listened to them in the first place?
Yeah, I think when a certain thing happened, I did yell at you, saying like, "How can you do this?" And Moss did mention Archive 81, which is also doing that, which is like, you are intruding, but at the same time, you are allowed to intrude. I cannot say the word right now. And I think that is very fun to see in horror, actually. And I'm going to be like going to David now, because David has more of a narrative style where you are the telling the story, and you have done that more with No Sleep and Shadows at the Door. Sometimes that happens too. And what do you think the difference between, or like, why is very weird question, but like, what
Why?
draws you into that than the other things?
Right. Yeah, the more narrative style, you have the feeling of it being a room, and you're welcomed into the room, and it's more, let me tell you about this thing that happened. And I've been thinking, as everyone's been talking about, the various different narrative styles that I've been involved with, because you get everything from, here I am telling you a story, sort of third person story, to here is the third person narrative, but we have voices coming in to be the characters, to the narrator is there to provide the scene breaks, a little bit like Leviathan Chronicles. They do that one particularly well, through to this is full cast audio drama or / first person. So I've done things from the whole range, and it's, I think it depends on what kind of a story you want to tell, because if you're doing right from the one side of, here I am I'll tell you a story, this is something that happened, uh, you get that very intimate feeling of hearing the old-fashioned type of storytelling, and you get to build the world together, as the story is being told, right the way through to, right, I am here in this scene. There's stuff going on all around me, and people are talking at the other end. And yeah, as I say, it really depends on what particular type of story you want to tell. And I think you can make any of those styles work, but there'll be one that works particularly well. No Sleep, the original No Sleep podcast, originally it was, or the No Sleep subreddit, should I say, was originally done where you had to do it. It had to be first person. It had to be something that could believably happen. It couldn't be an apocalyptic world, because you should be able to look out of the window and see that is not the case. It needs to be something that could happen in this world, which I think led to a really nice immersion of the podcast when that came along. It meant that everything you listened to was very, very feasible, and I think that was part of the horror, that feeling that yeah, these stories could happen to me.
Yeah.
And now we've got more third person narration that sort of thing, which again, it works. It allows more stories to be told in on different worlds. You can be in space now, etc., etc. But yeah, it's the as I say, lots of different narrative styles, and it depends on the story you want to tell.
Yeah, I think I did lucked out with this panel because you all are doing horror, but like so many different horrors, and like we can see um what makes one horror different than the other, but at the same time appreciating all of them. So firstly, thank you so much for being here. Now I'm going to go to question parts. If you guys have questions in the chat, I am reading it too, and I'm trying to like uh, integrate what you guys are saying to the conversation. But now you can ask, and I will directly say your name. Um, First question was from the Google Forms, actually. And I think No Sleep does it very well, and addressing this about like what do you think is too far and what does that mean to you, and you guys can just hop in and like say the answer if you have a thing, because like horror has warnings of it. It is to make us feel um anxious. It's a controlled environment anxiety, which is why I have been a big fan of horror as someone who has anxiety disorder. Putting that out, it's still sometimes I do skip stories and I do not write some stuff. But what does that mean for you? What do you think is too far as a sound design, as narrative, as stories? Yeah. And if any of you have an idea, you can jump in and answer that.
I know that one of the stories that or the series part of No Sleep that I had to skip was all of the body horror in the 1%. It's just not something I like. The squelches and the saws and the drills. So that's one I had to tap out on. But different people will have different things. I'm sure there's plenty of stuff that I've listened to that other people wouldn't be able to. So, and that's the wonderful thing both about horror, that there are all sorts of genres, all sorts of things that the writers can tweak or can ping, and that'll get a reaction in the listener. But also the fact that we do have so many podcasts out there now that if there's one that's not to your taste, you'll be able to find another one that absolutely is.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
I agree
in
with that.
Mhm.
I think that there really isn't any thing where you can say, "Oh, actually this type shouldn't be made." Like I think it all comes down to accurately labeling stuff and sort of keeping the gate open to, try an episode and say, "You know what? That's not it. Not for me."
Yeah.
And sort of do that without judgment, especially in horror. Like I know in visual media, I don't really tend towards heavy gore. I don't have a particular issue with it, but it's just not something I'll seek out. But there was such a funny little bit of time where I was working scanning documents for a historical society and listening to the Silt verses in headphones. And the Silt verses
Ooh.
is the gooeyest, the crunchiest,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
the most visceral. Listen to Johnny Sims as he is burned alive, podcast out there. And there were times I would be like mid moving document and I would just have to pause, holding the document aloft in the air as like, someone gets flayed alive or whatever. And it's great. It's not going to be what everyone wants. And there are other ones that are like the most mundane, like the horror is someone banging super hard on someone's hotel door, like that happened in Limetown. And I had to be like, actually, I can't listen to this. So, and I like how prevalent having content warnings is, so people can make a more informed choice on whether or not they want to listen to something.
Mhm.
I also really like how prevalent transcripts are, because if someone wants to experience part of the story or check on part of the story, but not not be as immersed, they have that
Yeah.
option. I know someone who consumes a lot of podcasts just by reading the transcripts, and that's awesome. Yeah.
That is one of the parts that I love too. Sometimes I cannot understand what people are saying, audio processing issues, and transcripts always come in handy. And yeah, I think that is one of the best parts, even though it is just audio, which means not everyone can listen. It is very accessible for those who can. And I think that is very special to audio dramas. So yeah. Do any of you want to add to too far question or
Yeah.
okay?
I mean, I bet you guys would all agree with this, but for horror to be truly successful, you kind of use the audience's imagination against them to create whatever feeling that us writers wants them to feel, and that could have a lot of range.
Mhm.
The thing about movies is that they don't really give the audience that freedom to imagine as far as they are comfortable with doing. Like if a movie shows someone getting their guts spilled out, you're like, oh, I have to see that. Like that's just something
Yeah.
that's unavoidable. But for audio, it's like you could have a gross sound, you can have some descriptive narration, but it's up to the listener to how far they want to imagine that in their head. Um, so like for example, in Graven, we have like a scene where a dude's face is melted off by an angel, and what I could have done
Yeah.
is I could have gone into extremely, descriptive, direct detail about what it looked like and whatnot. But instead, I described it in metaphor. I described that it looked like his skin was melting off like wet paper, which you can imagine as far as you want to imagine, but it's not directly,
It could be a little
shoving it
bit
in your
burn. We
face.
don't know.
Yeah. Um, so I guess if what's considered too far, it comes down to how much you're willing to describe versus how much you'll let the audience do themselves.
I might steal your you make the art part of the like viewer, the listener does make the art of dreaming into sound design panel that I'm going to do later on. Just saying, I'm stealing that, and I will make that
Take
into
it.
a question there.
Take it.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
you can have it.
I also
Marissa, I think
wanted
you
to
were, yeah.
hop in. Yeah, so I agree, especially a lot with what Anna said about adding transcripts and like very clearly
Mm-hmm.
labeling um, content warnings and being upfront with your listeners with what's going to take place. I personally like to push really far in my stories, but also wanted to talk about for a second working with actors in those situations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that, you know, telling really intense and disturbing and violent stories has a place. But I think something that was really important for me when working on Liars and Leeches, especially if you listen to episode 6, there's a lot of talk about domestic abuse in there, was really checking in with my actors while we were recording because I think there are kind of a lot of these built-in checks now in the audio world that people are starting to add for the audience. But I think it's also really important to
Mm-hmm.
check in with your actors when you're doing things like that. So,
Yeah.
for example, recording those scenes, we it was just me and one actor at a time. We took lots of breaks in between scenes. I was checking in like, "Hey, how are you feeling? Do you need to take any breaks?" Like, things like that. And I think it's really beneficial to push horror if that's what you want to do, but checking in with the actors is like so, so, so important,
Mm-hmm.
as well as checking in with your audience.
Mhm.
Yeah. And
Definitely, that was one of the things I remember. David Cummings of No Sleep. I had a Christian gay conversion
oof.
story, and he said there are some slurs in here. Is that going to be okay? And I thought, yeah, absolutely fine. Yeah, not a problem. But the fact that he did actually check in first, it meant a lot
Mm-hmm.
to me. So yeah, your actors are people too.
Yeah. And we do, while making horror, as indie horror makers, we do end up being both the director, actor, and also the coordinator to check up on actors and such. And that's like, I think, um, I don't see that as that. I think it's just like being more like a friend and like asking, hey, are you okay? But at the same time, that is also cool because like it gives us much more uh, tools and skills to use in even real life sometimes. And I think that's very cool too. Um, if anyone has anything to add to that question, you can. But if not, I'm going to move on to the next question.
I just have one thing I wanted to add on sort of building
Yeah.
on checking in with actors and stuff like that. Also, when you are, an actor sometimes and a writer, sometimes you write something and you're like, oh, this is great. It's so fun and angsty, and then you have to step into that role.
Oh, yeah.
And bringing it, you know what I'm talking about, and bringing in help is sometimes nice on that level. Like there is an episode of Before the Tone where the main character has a panic attack, and I play the
Yeah,
main
that
character, and I
was.
actually brought in my sibling who is also my script editor, and they had gotten training on talking people through panic attacks, so I had them direct for that scene, and it was really helpful to be able to take a step back away from focusing on my
Mhm.
other actor and saying like, okay, we have this in hand with someone else who's helping on that level. And yeah,
That
so
that
yeah,
episode
it
was
changes the
very
perspective.
great. And I also want to say again, this is a fanning out, being a simp a moment, but like that episode, how it dealt with panic attacks and how um I don't want to spoiler it, but like how it was just like the other person just start to talk about anything and everything, just like being there and reminding that you are in real life and people are there, kind of a thing, was so well done. So kudos to you for that.
Thank you. Danny is amazing. I love that character so much.
Yeah. Um, our next question is from Chirimeka, which is Reg. Do you have a favorite subgenre of horror? Any of you can jump in and say that, oh, I love this. And I
Um,
think, yeah.
I was gonna say I'm like all in for body horror. I think that's probably one of my favorite genres. And I
That's okay.
think
You can have it. You can have all of mine. It's fine.
I don't know. I think that body horror has definitely been one of my favorites for a long time, but I think especially in audio as a creator, having to play like body horror relies so heavily on the visuals. Like if you think about reading any like Junji Ito, you flip a page in one of
Mhm.
his books and you go, "Whoa, what is that?" And having
It's so
to,
fascinating.
yeah, taking that kind of, I guess, a visual jump scare almost from like graphic novels that feature body horror and trying to put it into audio is such a difficult task. So I kind of, like I was talking earlier about why I like audio drama. I love the creative challenge of body horror in audio drama. So I love consuming body horror and I love making body horror. Definitely my favorite.
That's so interesting to hear from you because Liars and Leeches, at least how far I've come, I am just starting to listen. So I might be wrong in the future. It is more emotional horror, and that is the part of it. It's not physical horror in a way. So it's interesting to hear that your favorite's actually body horror. And I want to like personally ask, what made you decide on that?
I think the main reason I wanted to focus on emotional horror, I don't want to get like too Debbie Downer-y, but part
Mhm,
of Liars and
mhm.
Leeches is based on a true story. So I think
Oh,
that being able to put difficult to deal with emotions in real life into, my horror typically ends on like a hopeful note. where
Hmm.
at least someone has made it through. So I feel like I enjoy telling emotional stories in that way, where it's kind of a symbol for things in real life that are difficult to handle. I will say though, don't count out the body horror in Liars and Leeches. I'd keep going a little bit.
Cool. I cannot wait to hear like more, so I can understand that even more better. Um, yeah, Miles Cole MJ is gone, but we can answer their question. I feel like horror is very timing based. I would love to know what your guys' thoughts process in on building tension. Is it something you have to figure out by vibe, or do you plot it out? Any of you can like jump in and answer that. I mean, we did talk about jump scares and building that tension. So if you guys have anything else you want to add to that,
Um,
Oh,
oh, go ahead.
no, I
okay.
was gonna say.
Hmm.
Oh,
Let's start with
bye.
Hannah. Okay, let's
Hi.
start with Hannah. We can do things like that. I heard Hannah first, so let's start with Hannah.
Sorry, Anna. So this is coming at it from a writer's point of view, but when you are writing something that is built to freak people out, that is built to create an ambling kind of terror, normally when you are scripting, you have an idea of what you're building towards, and that makes it easy, at least for me, to leave notes for my sound design cryptid himself to be like, this is where we should feel that panic start to kick in. Like, here, this is about the place, and then this is the emotional release at the end. Here and here. Now, I need it to build to that place because having written it, that's how it worked in my mind.
Yeah, that's it. I don't know sometimes what to say. Anna.
In terms of sound design, I don't do my sound design. I have a wonderful sound designer named Katie Seaton. Um,
Shout out.
and she's fantastic. And sometimes when you're trying to get something that you have a vague image of in your head, you're like, okay, this needs to be the moment where the audience is like, oh, we're screwed. It's over, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes
Mhm.
that is something really benign. And so I have left stage directions for my lovely and tolerant sound designer that say they're walking downstairs and it needs to be bad. It needs to be horrifying. We should all be so tense during this walking down a flight of stairs or during this elevator ride. Um,
Quick and Silver said, "We are now entering the panic zone," which is like exactly what you're describing.
yes.
Why is
One
the
of the
music
Beautiful.
building?
Yeah,
The
it's all about
music.
tension and the release of it.
Mm,
Mhm.
And sometimes
yeah.
building that tension that can go from an episode to episode basis, that could go from a scene to scene basis, or that could go from the start to the end of a season could be building that tension. And
Mhm.
some of what makes some of the best storytelling and audio drama is this tension that's built through an entire series of episodes and then it's finally released at the end of the story, which is like just super super fun to write.
One of the things that we
Yeah.
do with Shadows at the Door is that we adapt it's all about the creeping
Mhm.
tension there and the building of the atmosphere, and that comes from the M.R. James style of fiction, where it is all about come in, let me tell you a story, and then build until we get the view of the horrible thing at the end. But yeah, it's learning from the past, adapting that, and then creating new horror on uh, of that style. So it's it's a style of fiction that's been done for decades, centuries,
Yeah.
and it's rediscovering it and then sharing it with everyone else. It's a hey, we found this cool thing. Here it is.
Mm.
um, I just realized I actually I have ADHD and haven't taken my meds because it's too early. I realized we didn't answer Rick's question that much, so I'm gonna turn back and
Ooh. Oh no.
woke up like 2 hours ago.
Same.
So yeah, if any of you want to say that, mine is probably vet horror, which is a term I think coined by Daisy McNamara. I'm not sure, but I love his work. I'm a fan, so yeah.
I love folk horror. So that's my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
That idea
Mhm.
of like, there's something in the woods and it's really mad at you. Don't think too much about it. It's coming for you specifically. Don't go out there at night. Why are you in the forest again? How did you get
Yeah.
here?
I'm a big fan of obviously religious horror, but also like
Mm.
occult horror,
Mhm.
anything kind of
Really, I wouldn't
Lovecraft
guess that.
adjacent. So like cosmic and eldritch horror, just the fear of the unknown, and mixing that with kind of more like Catholic, like Christianity kind of like aesthetic. There's
Mhm.
the whole meme of like biblically accurate angel, and that's something I really wanted to play with because the
Definitely.
only details I give about these creatures is that they don't have faces and that they have wings, and everything else is left to the audience. And just that
Yeah.
fear of the unknown is really really effective, and I think you get that a lot with religious horror because I mean like in Christianity, you're taught not to try to describe visually what God looks like, and you're told that like your whole life. So there's this like kind of built-in fear of even trying to do that, which adds to the scariness of it.
Yeah, I was going to add saying like Graven Pod does that amazingly, especially the
Thank you.
angel horror. I have no idea how they look, but I'm afraid. That's
Exactly. It's
entire
up to
vibe
you.
of it.
Yeah, and I also like religious horror because I mean, for me, I grew up somewhat Christian, and then I found out I was queer, and I was like, I don't really vibe with this uh, teaching
Mhm.
very much. And a lot of the story in a lot of religious horror media is that there's these people that are facing oppression because of religion, and they're persevering through it by killing the monster or whatever the story may end up being. And it's kind of a way to show that physically.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mm.
One of the
For
favorite things that I like
oh,
to
go ahead.
do for when I'm acting is the guy who is finding that his world is not what he thought it was and is gradually
Mm.
getting less and less grounded in reality, and I love that sort of thing to play. But listening, give me a good ghost story. I'm a sucker for that sort of thing.
That actually makes so
Yes.
much sense with what you wrote for 9 to Midnight.
Hmm.
Because that is in a different way, but yeah, that is still like the guy is losing hope in a way, and that's so cool.
Yep. Yep, I love it. And in fact, the 9 to Midnight version was a cut down version. I had one that was almost twice as long as that, with exploring a few more little things. That is actually available to listen to
I
on Transcontinental Terror through the Sonic Society. But
dropped the
it was.
link because I was going to say release David's cut, but I didn't know it was already released.
Yes, yes, it was, and I pared it down for 9 to Midnight because I thought I'll just put them both out at the same time. But yeah, it was. I think it worked both ways. The sort of shorter, more visceral version versus
Hmm.
the longer, more exploratory version. But yeah, that's the sort of thing I enjoy listening to and being a part of.
Yeah, Anna.
For me, for writing, I am a short story writer by trade. That's my
Hmm.
my main thing that I love writing, and for that, I really love Kind of like what David was saying. I love writing someone who's spiraling out of reality.
Yeah.
It's just so fun.
Amazing.
You can just the world becomes a little less real, and what things mean to them
Mhm.
can change and become a lot more intense. I can really get into their head, and I love that. For listening, I quite enjoy I enjoy gothic horror quite a bit. For an incredibly specific trope, I love horror that connects to circuses and performances. It's so fun.
Would you guys say that like your favorite genre of horror is woke horror? Because they slowly wake up and see the reality, but at the same time lose it. That was a terrible joke. I'm sorry. Uh, I am going to wrap this up because I think I'm already violating the time.
Yeah, we hit
But
that hour 20, sadly.
yeah, I did tell Moth not to tell me that. That's not on me. I
Next year
do
we'll
want
do
to.
2 hours. I'll
Yeah,
lobby for that. I'll lobby for that.
exactly. I did want to actually talk about queer horror too, but like you guys just talking is queer horror at the same time because I'm not assuming things that I think we're all queer here, or at least somewhat of allies, so it works in a sense. But I want to close off with like going again this time in reverse alphabet to like where can people find you? And what do you want to promote? Do you have half a minute, all of you? Ollie, start now.
Yeah, you can find my show at just look up Graven Podcast. I left a link in chat too to my card. I am also working on sound designing for an upcoming fiction podcast called
Cauterized.
Cauterized that will be coming out sometime this year. That's been super fun. I love sound designing. If you ever need a sound designer, that was my specialty in college, and I love to work with other people because writing is fun, but sometimes I don't have the energy to write. I'd rather just go in my editing software, go in my DAW, and just move around the little colored clips for a while. So if anyone needs a sound designer, I am always looking to help out.
Yes, Marissa, another sound designer.
True, true. So yeah, I would say for Liars and Leeches, you can find it just on any podcast app, and then I put a link in the chat. I also own an audio post-production company called Hemlock Creek Productions, which is where I do all my other editing, so you can see like all my other work through there. And for Liars and Leeches, we are actually going to be doing a crowdfund for the second season starting March
I
31st.
am going to ask Hannah. I think your
I'm so
microphone.
sorry. Yeah, the
Something.
microphone's
Okay,
freaking out. Sorry.
that's okay. Okay, Marissa, I'm sorry. You can go again.
Oh, no, you're totally fine. And I guess I could put a link to the crowdfund in there for a second too, but that's pretty much
Yeah.
it. So Liars and Leeches season 2 is happening after a hot minute. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, I'm too. Hannah, before your mic dies, Hannah. Oh no, I
That
think
was
it
me
did.
taking the mic for a second. Hi.
Okay,
Lost to the
okay.
horde.
Sorry, I
I
returned.
was afraid.
I got banished for a second. Hi, yeah. You can find my stuff at Eggwood After Dark. I'll pop that in the chat. Our website. We're currently beginning to fundraise for season 2. If you're interested in helping out, I'm also writing for a couple of different like anthology podcasts at the moment, including Tales from the Dead West and Professor Pandemonium's Peculiar Panopoly. I think I said that right. I'm not sure. So you can check out my writing there as well. But yeah, that's what I have to say. Hi. Sorry about the mic.
Hi. No problem. I'm glad that we got an end for you too. And David.
Part of me wants to go. The voice of Ty Betteridge was David Alt. Check out his podcast. No, Shadows at the Door, or visit davidalt.co.uk for more.
More. Amazing.
Yeah, so that basically says it all. You can find me. Shadows at the Door is one of my podcasts. No Sleep. I'm on loads and loads and loads of them. But you can find everything through davidalt.co.uk.
Yeah, if you you can also at the hour of 3, which is our say David all 3 times in front of your mirror, he will appear.
As long as you have an audio drama script in your hands.
Yes. Anna?
You can find my shows at knaveofhearts.com. Knave of Hearts is the production company name. I've dropped the link in the chat. My podcasts are Before the Tone and A Somewhat Peculiar Frog that should, but probably won't, show up when you search for them on various podcatchers. They'll show up on some, on others they won't because I can't get Apple Podcasts to work.
Apple Podcast is bane of our full existence. Don't worry.
So frustrating. In which case, you can find the RSS feed on knaveofhearts.com and plug that in manually on any podcatcher, and it's very easy once you start doing that. You can also find us on social media. We are on Twitter and Tumblr at Knave of Hearts AD. If you listen to our podcasts, and I so hope you will, please tell
do.
us, because
It
it
is
would make me
amazing.
so happy. I want to hear
Hey, I
thoughts.
recognize that sentence. I've heard that before.
Thank you all so much. This was amazing. Now let's close it. Again, there's a giveaway and there are other panels. You can follow the panels in this account, which is like twitch.tv/podcast book club, not boot. But yeah, now I'm going to cut it here because I think David should go and sleep. I'm going to release him now.
Yes. Go sleep.
Listen back into the wild.
Thank you very much, everyone. Lovely to be
Yes.
a part of it. And yeah, good luck with everything.